Welcome to the Conscious Resistance Network. My name is Derrick Broze. This is your home for content that explores the news, politics, conspiracies, deep research, health, you name it, spirituality, from a perspective outside of the left-right paradigm, outside of the mainstream, and something that I hope can bring you insight into what's going on in the world around you. I'd like to ask you to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com. Follow us on all of our social media channels right here, and if you want to support, sign up on Patreon or Subscribestar. Sign up for our email newsletter and get Kratom, a free ounce of Kratom, from My Brave Botanicals right there, and that helps support our work. And of course, we are doing our ongoing crowdfunding campaign, asking those who want to keep me on air and keep me doing this while my channel is being suppressed and censored by YouTube, and while the alternative media is being essentially killed because of censorship. If you want to support my work and my thoughts, please consider investing. So, the title of this video is called No, I'm Not a Liberal / Progressive. And I want to make it clear in the first minute of the video, for anybody who came here, this is not a video bashing liberals. So if you came here to do that, then you might be in for a surprise. And if you came here expecting that and you were turned off by it, hopefully you'll stick around to hear my points here. So let's get that clear. And then before we go further into the specifics of this video and what I'm trying to explore, let's see if we can parse apart and define the terms liberal and progressive. This is written from the Huffington Post, which tends to be a kind of left-wing outlet. And it says, "What's the difference between a liberal and a progressive?" by David Sirota, back in 2005, updated in 2011. Now, I will say this first. Of course, this is just one man's opinion. I don't think you should necessarily take this definitively, but I found it to be interesting, and it kind of helps outline our conversation. Again, first, somebody who is considered liberal or progressive in their cultural values or their politics tends to be seen, at least in the United States, that's where I'm at, so I'm focused on the left side of the political spectrum. And there are varying shades of that to those who consider themselves liberal, but maybe they're not full-on left-wing socialist, communist, democratic socialist, things of this sort. And then those who consider themselves progressive, who are the same. Those words might not apply to them. However, there are also those who the labels liberal, progressive, socialist, communist do apply to them, and they wear those labels. Just like there are labels for the people on the right, people in the center, and those of us who try to stay off the whole thing. So let's look at what David says the difference between a liberal and a progressive is. We know that they tend to be on the left, but what else distinguishes them? He says, the questions from the media on the subject are always something like, isn't progressive just another name for liberal that people want to use because liberal has become a bad word? The answer, in his opinion, is no. There is a fundamental difference when it comes to core economic issues. It seems to me that traditional liberals, in our current parlance, are those who focus on using taxpayer money to help better society. A progressive are those who focus on using government power to make large institutions play by a set of rules. So let's see if we can take that apart a little further. A liberal, in his view, is somebody who uses taxpayer money, the state, to try to make society better. So, a statist is another way to say that. A progressive is somebody who uses government power to make large institutions play by a set of rules. Also a statist, variety of statists, and I'm not saying just those on the left, those on the right are statists as well. They just have different values. We could just label them all statists, but obviously there are nuances. The progressive is a statist who tries to use government power to, say, go after corporations or other entities. And a liberal is somebody who uses the government to take money from taxpayers, from individuals, and then to try to use that money for the good of other people. So that's where he's saying liberal and progressive. So to put things in a more concrete terms, a liberal solution in some of our current problems with high energy costs would be to increase funding for programs like low-income home energy assistance programs. A more progressive solution would be to increase the program, but also crack down on price gouging and pass laws better regulating the oils industry's profiteering and market manipulation tactics. A liberal policy towards prescription drugs is one that would throw a lot of taxpayer cash to the pharmaceutical industry to get them to provide medicine to the poor. A progressive prescription drug policy would be one that centers around price regulations and bulk purchasing in order to force down the cost of medicine. Let's be clear, most progressives are also liberals, and liberal goals in better funding America's social safety net are noble and critical. It's the other direction that's the problem. Many of today's liberals are not fully comfortable with progressivism as defined in these terms. Many of today's Democratic politicians, for example, are simply not comfortable taking a more confrontational posture towards large economic institutions. I think we've read enough of this. But what they're pointing out there is that there is currently on the left in America and the Democratic Party a battle between the more quote unquote centrist and liberal Democrat part of the party and the more progressive socialist part of the party that's trying to take things at a more extreme. But I just wanted to define those terms since the video is using them. And now the reason I'm using this video, we can go further and get into the whole progressivism right here, and we will in just a moment. The reason that I'm using this title of this video is because I can't tell you the amount of times, I can tell you at least a handful or a dozen of times, but it's happened across the spectrum with liberals and left-leaning people that I've been around them, and they say things like, well, you know, liberals like us, or, well, progressives like us, blah, 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 blah. And there's just this assumption because I'm hanging around or because we agree on certain things that I must use that same label, or obviously I'm a liberal, obviously I'm a progressive. But no, I'm not. I've never once used those terms to describe myself. I know Jeffrey Tucker, libertarian thinker, describes himself as a classical liberal because liberal used to be essentially a libertarian as we know it in the United States, but it's become somebody who believes more in state power as opposed to somebody who believes in libertarian, liberal values. So some people say classic liberal, but that means totally different than the liberal today and the progressive today. But I'm not either of those things. But again, I've been in situations where somebody had said, hey, yeah, you know, well, for example, let me give you an example. I was at the Women's March, and I was there with a bunch of different activists. This is back in 2018, and we were filming a reality show. I've told some of you guys about this. And the crew that was with us, you know, they see us out there at the Women's March, so maybe they assume that because we wanted to cover that topic that we were left-wing. But we weren't. We were mainly there to not troll or make fun of, but to challenge the protesters. And that's what we were doing. We were talking to them about war. We were talking to them about issues that we found important. And the crew that was filming this reality show, they heard us talking about these ideas. And I guess, again, because we were at a women's march, that's mostly left-wing, mostly Democrat BS. And they hear us talking about good things, and we're younger, they assume that we must be left-wing, we must be liberal. And I think that this happens to a lot of people. Not just left-wing, not just liberal, where people get misidentified. But definitely, I can just share a brief story, and I've told this before, that when I was 18 and I was very much anti-Bush because I was against the wars after 9/11, I didn't really know what was what. I was 18. I thought, I'm going to vote for the first time, like a lot of people feel. And I basically thought that John Kerry, the Democrats, were the answer, right? So I voted for the other side because you just assume, well, look, these are a bunch of old white guys that are talking about war and all these things. They seem just so old and like they're super conservative. They're really, they don't like drugs and these kind of things. And for somebody who's young and maybe rebellious, you don't really identify with that. So if you identify with anything in that political arena, it's like, okay, well, I guess the Democrats are, they seem anti-war. We know that's a lie, but it's like, oh, they seem anti-war. They seem to care about my values, and they're younger looking because, they always got to put a younger, fresh face out there on the left side. And I fell for it. I think a lot of people fall for it. So most young people, now, of course, this is changing. There is definitely younger people who, because of the extreme tactics of the left, are pushing back and are becoming more conservative. There are some polls saying that younger people, millennials, and maybe even Gen Z, some of them are actually becoming more conservative. There's always going to be some who are more liberal, some who are more conservative. But generally, I think that typically the left does a better job of appealing to people on the left. And in the youth. And so when people see a young person involved, there's just this assumption that they must be liberal, they must be left-wing. And even with my campaign for mayor, there are a lot of people who are coming to my campaign who support Bernie Sanders. And not because I'm talking about even any of the same ideas that Bernie's talking about, but what they see in him is somebody who's out there calling out corruption. And so they see me calling out corruption and they identify with it in that same way. Now, we're not even talking about the same economics and anything like that. We see a lot of the same problems. We definitely don't see the same solutions. And that's what the case is with most of these situations. So, but I've also had this happen at anarchist conferences where, again, anarchists will be at an event and they might be surprised to know that, hey, not every single person who comes to an anarchist conference is an anarchist. And they might just be there to learn or to listen or to just be around people where they can talk freely, even if they don't necessarily agree 100% on the political beliefs. So even in those circles, somebody might just assume, yeah, well, we're all anarchists here. And I've seen that happen where certain speakers just talk that way. I'm like, no, I don't think everybody in this room is an anarchist. And that's fine. That's perfectly cool. We don't necessarily all have to be of the same thing. So I guess my thought on that is, look, don't make assumptions that just because somebody's in your own space or in your certain in group that they are the same thing as you. Get to know people as individuals. Don't collectivize them or make assumptions. Anybody ever read The Four Agreements? It's one of my book recommendations. I still highly recommend it. One of those 4 agreements that you make with yourself and with the world is do not make assumptions, and it saves you a lot of trouble and confusion. So not making assumptions with other people's beliefs just because, oh, well, look, this person also wants to end the drug war, or this person also has this view on immigration, or this person also has this view on vaccines, or whatever it may be, and then assuming that, well, they must also carry the same label, or we must all agree on the same thing. It's not going to happen. It's unrealistic, and I think that you do yourselves and others a disservice. Now, a couple other points I'd like to make on this whole, because we're kind of discussing the political spectrum here: progressive, liberal, libertarian, Republican, right-wing, conservative, all these kind of silly divisions. But I wrote this article, and it's actually a short interview I did. This is back in 2015 for Ben Swann's Truth in Media. New documentary, Imminent Threat Calls for the Alliance of Progressives and Libertarians. And I wrote about this back then because I was hoping that maybe people would, go for it. Because at the time, and it seems so far away now, this is 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago that I wrote this article. Wow. It seems so impossible now these days to imagine there being any kind of alliance between liberals and libertarians and progressives at this point, because it's just, for one, the left has shifted further and further left, and some of the right has shifted further and further right. And the left seems exclusively concerned about immigration and climate change, and those are just not topics where they're going to agree with on the right. But this documentary, Imminent Threat, explored the kind of Edward Snowden story, and I interviewed the director of it. His name was, Janik Ambrose, who previously worked on documentaries covering current events, including 2012's Closing Bell, which looked at the 2008 financial collapse. And I asked him about this alliance. I said, well, what are the challenges in approaching the situation of an alliance between left and right? He said the most challenging thing was to remain totally neutral in terms of progressive and libertarian. The film purposefully has 3 interviewees who are unabashed progressives and 3 libertarians. This was once again to make the point that these 2 cohorts can work together, and because they have so much overlap in terms of civil liberties and foreign policies. Now, let's see what's further. I said, if there was an alliance to be an alliance of activists and citizens on the left and right of the political spectrum, what issues do you think would unite these groups? He said, I haven't seen much on the idea of an alliance between progressives and libertarians on specific issues. The issues they overlap on are civil liberties and limited foreign policy. After that, there's not much they can agree on, and they're extreme opposites with economics, one more fearful of government, the other more fearful of corruption. And so he's right. There are definitely some extreme differences in these 2 groups, but I think that an alliance between these 2 groups and actually communicating, once again, not making assumptions about the other side, oh, the progressives are all just regressive statists, socialists who want to, turn America into a hellhole where eco-fascism rules. Maybe some people, but I doubt all of them. And the other side says, oh, the right is all just conservative, Christian, racist, right-wingers who want to take away my bodily autonomy and want to destroy the environment. Maybe some of them, but definitely not all of them. So it's valuable to understand that there are allies on both sides, all sides of the political spectrum. You have to find them, and it takes an effort, but there are also enemies. And this brings me to my essay, The Authoritarian Right and Left, Chapter 8 from my book, Manifesto of the Free Humans, which I co-wrote with John Vibes and released in April 2017. And this little link here is not from my website. I found this on somebody else's website. I recommend reading this essay, and I'm going to include this link, although I would appreciate it if you read it on my website too. The reason I share this one is because it has a good kind of guide here. There's a bunch of pictures that go along with it explaining the concepts that I'm talking about, which is essentially that, as I just said, there are allies to be found on left, right, and across the political spectrum, but there are also enemies on the right and the left, the authoritarian right and the left. And this is a pretty good I think compass here. You have anarchism or freedom, sovereignty on this side, as I would put it, and have libertarian socialism, libertarian capitalism. Those are the different economic systems that people tend towards. And the further you go this way, you get more libertarian or more free towards anarchism and different shades of anarchism. And further this way, more socialistic, and towards this way, more capitalistic, and further down, more authoritarian. So you can come this way towards capitalism and statism and have a state capital system, which is what we have in the United States and which most people have had, or state socialist systems, this is all just statism or authoritarianism. And then you can go here and have more of a market-based system, and this might be libertarian socialist economics and other ideas that I'm not too familiar with at the moment. But my point is, there is authoritarians and totalitarians and statists on all sides of the political spectrum. You have to find ways to work with those who are not completely indoctrinated. And the way you do that is by approaching them as individuals and not making assumptions that they are just like you or believe just like you. So I hope this video is valuable. It's just been a thought that's been on my head, and I decided to finally get it out. And I hope you found something interesting, insightful in it. Please share your thoughts below, especially for those of you who are just chatting along. Comment in the comment box if you don't mind too, so people can see your comments. Sometimes you guys only comment in the chat and not everybody watches that, so go ahead and leave us a comment below. Of course, if you want to support my work, check out the crowdfunding campaign. The link will be below the video. And subscribe, follow, like, share, all that good stuff. Bookmark theconsciousresistance.com. And until next time, friends, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.